And when you and I were touching base just a week or so ago, you mentioned an area that I was not really I was not as familiar with when it came to how this particular area is also impacted by housing policy. Can you help the good people understand what it is that you're focusing on right now and why, frankly, we should all be concerned?
Foster care. I think that most people are not aware that about 50% of the homeless population in the country was a former foster child.
What?
Yes, foster care.
Oh my God.
I practiced I don't do it anymore, but I worked at various nonprofits where I represented people who were facing eviction for years. And still, even doing that for nearly 15 years, this is something that I did not know. And I was stunned to find out.
Wow.
So I went into this deep dive to do an article last year for Dame Magazine on it. And I'm working on something new coming up. But basically what I found was that there are three different points, three different entry points. Number one, uh, the shocking number one shocking fact is that you can lose your child and they be in put in foster care because you are homeless or facing eviction.
Mm.
So if you're
Crimes of
facing eviction,
poverty.
or it doesn't even need to be if you're facing eviction, if your home is in disrepair. So, for example, I had someone call me years ago and she was screaming into the phone and she said, I remember distinctly, she said, they're trying to take my babies away because the landlord won't do the repairs. And I was like, what are you
Oh
talking
my
about?
God. Oh my
And
God.
basically, the landlord, according to her, and I believe her, the landlord wouldn't do the repairs, and the landlord wanted her out and was trying to, pull a power play and was like, I want you out. So listen, I'm not going to do the repairs. And she was like, well, I'm not going to leave. And then she was like, okay, well, I'm going to call ACS on you.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I thought, wow. So that was one where you can lose your child due to housing issues and it be eviction, homelessness, or disrepair. And then the second part, actually, before I get to the second part, I want us to understand that that's not a small amount of people. The other part that I found through doing some research is that we're talking about 20,000 children every year are
Jesus.
placed in foster care due to housing issues. And this is from the National Federal Database. So this
I
is
want to just say, Leah, it's housing issues, yes, but it's also poverty. Because
exactly.
if, and I remember learning about when I first came to the Center for Law and Social Justice, decades before my arrival, there was a case that they had taken and successfully were able to prosecute that basically said that the New York City version of ACS, Association of Child Welfare Services, you guys there's a variety of names that you can use, but basically the people who are going to take your kids if there's a problem in the household, basically were targeting Black immigrant women and Black American women who had low levels of education and targeting them if your house was dirty, if or unkept, if you had, if one older sibling was watching a younger sibling because you could not also work and afford childcare because of something that we all can readily understand. But they were
Right.
able to establish that these tools had been essentially been weaponized against Black people, whether they were Black Americans or Black immigrants, in a way that thousands of children were snatched out of homes wrongfully. They would not provide interpreters. They would not provide language supports or any of the other supports that were mandated at the time. This is a huge issue. And I did not realize that we're now still talking about 20,000 some odd people every year
Yes.
being caught up in a system because of
It,
this. Whew,
it, and
Jesus.
and it is the fifth highest. There are several reasons why a child is removed from the household and placed in foster care. According to federal data, it's the fifth highest reason, and that means it's higher than a lot. It's higher than parent neglect. One of them, I think, is higher than drug abuse and sex abuse. I mean, it's a very big deal, and it's a very high up number.
My God.
So the second part that I want people to understand, and this is the second shocking fact, is that when children get placed in foster care, another thing that's happening is that they actually become homeless in foster care. What does that mean? There
Wow.
are not as many homes available, licensed foster care homes, because as we know, I saw this through doing this work. When I started doing this work like 15 years ago, you would ask people, hey, do you have anywhere to go in case you get evicted? And people always, they're like, I could go by my sister. I could go. I don't really want, have to burden them, but I could go to that. Let me tell you something. COVID, the pandemic changed that. People stopped being as, I think, as communal. I think people were just more, mentally stretched out. And suddenly it just became, I don't have anyone. And
Wow.
I noticed that shift. So that was where people were facing eviction. I want us to understand the housing crisis, the fact that many of us cannot even afford to buy a home. Many of us, are struggling. What is it? 300,000 Black women unemployed, right?
Right.
And
And
so,
that was at the beginning of last year. We're well over a
right,
500,000 at this point.
right. And so now you enter the question of, do you have enough resources and time to take in a foster child? So that answer has dwindled. That answer has dwindled. And so there are much less licensed foster care homes. Most states have, out of all of the states, most have experienced a decline in foster care homes. So what does that visually and practically mean?
Hmm.
That means that there are no homes for these kids. So you have these thousands of kids a year, and I'm going to say something that I'm going to put a trigger warning. That means these kids are literally sleeping in the foster care offices.
Now, I
They're
want to
literally
pause you
they
there
literally
because
live there.
audience, you'll remember that I talked about in how in Tennessee there was this scenario or situation where children were, as you just said, Attorney Goodridge, they were being forced to sleep overnight in office buildings because there were no homes for them, which to me felt that like you're going to take this child. Let's say this is an issue of housing insecurity, not necessarily abuse in the home. Obviously, if there's abuse in the home, the calculus shifts a little bit. But if you're doing crimes of poverty, you're going to take a
Right.
child from a home where a landlord is weaponizing the state to come in to prevent them from having to do repairs on this mother. And you're going to take them from a home that is a home that needs to be repaired, but is a home, and then put them in a system that can't house them. And then the mother and the family are separated, or the children and the parents are then separated and exposed to all of the traumas of the foster care system. And that's supposed to be a solution to a mother, an example that you gave, not being able to have her repairs done. That makes no sense
Exactly.
to me.
Exactly. Because I think most people when they hear this, they're like, well, we want what's in the best interest of the child. So yes, you should remove children from their household. Once I say, oh, it's how they, oh, well, you don't, of course you want the best interest of the child. But if we're talking about you're going to remove a child because their parent is about to be homeless or their parent is facing eviction, and then you're going to place the child in foster care knowing full well you don't have anywhere for that child to go.
Hmm.
So the thing is, these children are not sleeping for one night. They live in the offices. That's one example. The other
Jesus.
thing that I uncovered, and I don't want to say I uncovered it like but like I did, but I this is one of the things I found from the research is another point is let's say you're in foster care and then you end up you steal a backpack and then you end up in juvenile detention and then it's
Hmm.
time for you to be released like a year later, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and then foster care is like, well, we don't have a home for you to go. We actually don't have anywhere for you to go. So then they tell the juvenile detention, the jail, like, all right, well, just keep them in there because they're being housed in there. Literally, that's happening. That same exact scenario happened in Chicago. A 15-year-old stole a backpack at a bus stop.
Mm.
They were
Mm.
placed in juvenile detention. When it was time for them to come out, the foster care agency said, we don't have anywhere for this child to go, so just keep them in there. And they were left in jail languishing for 8 months past their scheduled release date.
Jesus. My God.
8 months.
God.
And these are children, right? So this is another thing. They're keeping them in jails when they're past the release date because the jail is seen as their housing. Another thing.
Mm.
And now the other thing is now people, so I guess some entities are thinking, oh, there's some big business here. They're actually building detention centers, or what I should say are, I think that was a Freudian slip. I didn't even mean detention centers. They're building
Well,
here, but they look like detention centers. They have
right.
wires and they're building them. Um, and it's literally for housing for foster care. And I want us to understand, no, this is not like
Mm.
some beautiful facility in New Mexico. A 16-year-old boy named Jaden Garcia, he committed suicide at one of these detention centers.
Oh.
And his roommate, another foster care youth, found him.
Oh
And
my God.
exactly, exactly. And
Now, they
some of
could take
his
that money and invest it in repairing the woman's house. They could take the money and invest it in the counseling and the therapy that is going to be needed to help these families to become whole. There was a brother we had on a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember his name. Oh my gosh, he was from the Northwest, and he's a PhD student, and he's studying how our preference in this country, the American preference for efficiency over care, is what's driving these sorts of decisions. It costs you so much less money to repair the damn pipes in an apartment than it does to house someone in an office building under such conditions that they're at risk of unaliving themselves. This to
yeah.
me feels like it's got all of the fingerprints of American intelligence on it, which is to say complete and utter foolishness. What are the racial disparities? I know that we are way more present in the foster care system than we need to be. Are we as present as foster families as we have been in the past? I know you said that the numbers have dwindled, but what is that looking like for communities that were already on the struggle end of that block?
Well, first of all, a large majority of the foster children are Black and Latino. And I know Latino is that can be any race, but from the statistics, they're listed as Black and or Latino. That's the overwhelming majority of foster children in the US.
Mm.
And I also want to point out, and this is the thing that I'm writing about that I'm working on now, is that because of all of these loopholes, this makes foster care um, a very vulnerable spot for sex trafficking. So I don't know if people are aware. I certainly was not fully aware, but foster care is a big sex trafficking business. And I mean huge sex trafficking. In Georgia, Senator John Ossoff released a report that 1790, almost 1800 foster care youth went quote unquote missing, and they found that they were very likely sex trafficked. That's
Wait
literally
a minute.
what
Wait a
yes,
minute. Wait a
yes,
minute.
right.
Wait a
But this
minute.
is what I'm
Wait a
writing
minute.
about because yes, what
Wait
I'm
a
saying.
minute.
And it is like, oh, and they're mostly black girls. Yes.
The
But
fuck?
we're
You
talking
take a
about
child from my house and you
17.
lose them in a sex trafficking ring? I
Let me
gotta
tell
fight
you.
the state and the
Oh
Epstein
no.
class.
And then when I said, well, wait a minute, how does this even happen? How, and I said, me being naive upon, when I first started investigating this, I said, well, hold on, how does a foster parent lose the foster child to sex trafficking? And then the research showed it is the foster parent who is doing the sex trafficking. So oh
Jesus.
yes, in the Bronx, right here in New York, and it happens quite a bit because that was Georgia, but it also happens in New York. So in New York, what they do is they have a woman pose who's going to be the foster parent, and then they bring the foster parent home. They know full well that there's not going to be an incredible amount of oversight, especially because these are young Black children, right? And
Right.
so as soon as they bring them home, they have their partner, their boyfriend, or their husband or whoever, who they never listed, they never said that they were together. And then they just hand the child over to that person. This is what
Wow.
happened in the Bronx, and it was a federal investigation, and that couple is in jail. But this is what this is one of the ways that they do this. And so they lie, and then they say the foster child ran away. And the foster child didn't run away. They have them out there in sex trafficking.
I'm so disgusted right
Disgusted?
now.
Yes.
I am
Yeah.
I who okay. In terms of, and I'm seeing that, shout out to you in the Sankofa chat. I'm seeing that now they're proposing in Tennessee that those children be placed in juvenile detention centers, not because they've committed a crime, simply because they're in foster care. So, yeah, so thank you for helping me to close that circle, Kamika. This is basically, shout out to the Sankofa connectors. This is basically a scenario where we take you from a home that you're in. We ain't got no place to put you, so we're going to stick you in this office building. And then Tennessee is going the next step of saying, well, we ain't got the ability for you to stay in an office building, so we're going to actually then put you back in juvenile detention, which is what you were just referencing. And the fact that this is happening in Georgia, it's happening in New York, it's happening with race, with black and brown children through the foster care system and other children through other means. What, in terms of community-based solutions, and I'm asking this earnestly because when I was a little kid, in addition to believing that I was going to set up a clinic where basically I would have like a Brooklyn brownstone and I was going to provide, I was going to deliver people's babies in the ground floor, and then I was have people living in the building up above, and then they would provide service, and we would barter. It was going to be a barter system. I'd provide health care, they would take classes and educate the community. One of my other plans for how to make the world a better place while I was 8 was to own a building where we could have a group home, but like a good one. And then when I became an adult, I was talking with my Sankofa crew, and I was like, y'all, what if we had a building that could be like a group home, but it was like a Sankofa analysis and education system? And so like, this to me is an issue that while I have never been a foster child, I remember we had a number of children who my parents were fostering for. In terms of community response, I don't even know if there is one, but what are you seeing in terms
No,
of how communities can
oh,
effectively protect these babies and protect the sanctity of the village?
I think that we need to talk about abolishing foster care. I
Yeah.
think we need to talk about because foster care itself has just become trafficking and then trafficking of all forms.
Right.
Um, like for example, when kids are in foster care and then they age out, they often have nowhere to go. Like they literally have, imagine being an 18-year-old or a 21-year-old with you don't have like 5 years of experience on a job most of the time, so you don't have a job that can pay the rent, so they often have nowhere to go. And people who have these vouchers, like Section 8 vouchers, they know that it's not easy to find a place even with the vouchers.
Right.
So one of the things, I think the first thing we need to really think about is and this is where I'm at, we need to get, not even, let's forget reform, we need to talk about how we abolish this whole system. And that means, how do we address the reasons why someone is in foster care? How do we address those issues?
Right.
So how do we address all of the poverty issues that lead to children being removed from their home? How do we strengthen families so that children are safe in the home and that the entire
Mm.
family unit can operate?
Right.
Um, so that's one huge way to start. There are some states, I think Washington, for example, it was either passed, I think they did pass a law about providing housing for foster youth, because I think at this point we already have people who are in foster youth. So we also need to talk about, like, how do we help them? And
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. I am just even saying it, I'm just really cautious because throughout all of my research, what I have learned is that this is just a very vulnerable population. And anytime I even saw, like, I think it was a celebrity trying to create farm. From all that I have learned, my brain now just goes to, I hope this is not some like ruse for trafficking, because that's all the states. I find it it's just disgusting. Like all states in New York, for example, New York had, uh, New York had about 1,200 young people in the entire state go missing. And I'm talking about just all young
I
people in
cannot.
foster care.
I cannot.
300,
I can't even
302
I
of
cannot
them,
even comprehend what you are telling me right now. My brain
yes,
is breaking.
302 of them were from foster care. So I just want us to understand that, like, this has just become an area that is rife for nefarious reasons, because predators are aware that they are vulnerable, um, and that people make money from this. The other thing is, when these kids are in the offices, several reports have revealed that people who work in those offices have sexually abused the children, whether that be the maintenance, the
Want
work.
to
Yeah,
fight
because
somebody.
it is that's why I can't even watch this show any. What is it called? A Law and Order SVU,
Oh
because
no, I've yeah.
you watch these show and you're like, wow, that's a wild storyline, and then you look it up and you're like, oh, that is word bar for bar, word for word, what happened in New York City.
When they say ripped from the
They had an
headlines, that's what
episode.
they mean.
Yeah, they had an episode about they've had several episodes, but they had a more recent one about sex trafficking in foster care, and it is a real, that's not a storyline, that is reality. And It's terrible.
Mm.
It's terrible. I had to take several mental breaks, to be honest, in doing this research. I wrote an article and then I've done presentations, but I have to take several mental breaks. And it has caused me to like have, if I'm being brutally honest, have like I'm often like, who am I talking to? Can I even trust you? Where are you at in this foster care industry?
Right.
What do you do? It's caused me to have a very suspicious lens, and I don't give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But you know,
I'm
you hear
seeing in
about
terms of
these
the
cases.
show chat, a number of folks saying, this is why one person said this is why the Atlanta Hawks having a Magic City night is effing ridiculous. We're talking. There's been this conversation about like Magic City and how the Atlanta Hawks are promoting stripper culture and this idea that like a lot of these women who are a part of stripper culture are a part of this population that ended up there through an inability to really be self-determining. I see some folks are saying not all foster care is bad. Abolishment seems harsh. There has to be a better way. I think there does have to be a better way. I don't know what it is. I know that there are not enough of us taking in foster children. I'll say that. I know that it's if the solution is that you need more families that have resources and that care to be a part of it, we should probably see more enrollment for that sort of program.